The same question kept coming up, over and over again. Karoline Leavitt answered patiently at first, but eventually she had enough. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. The briefing room in Washington, D.C. was packed. Journalists filled every seat, and a row of cameras lined the back wall, their lenses locked onto the podium where Karoline stood. She had done this many times before addressing the press, handling tough questions and controlling the message. But today felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension humming just beneath the surface. She adjusted the microphone and greeted the room. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started." Immediately, hands shot up across the room. Reporters were eager, hungry for a headline. Karoline nodded to a familiar face, a journalist from a major network. "Can you comment on the administration's latest tax policy?" he asked. She responded smoothly, delivering a well-rehearsed answer. The next question was about education reform. Again, she answered without hesitation, maintaining her composure. It was routine, just another day in front of the press until it wasn't. A sharp voice cut through the room. "Ms. Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." Karoline recognized the reporter immediately. She was from a liberal-leaning outlet known for pushing hard and stirring controversy. Seated near the front, she leaned forward with a smirk, tapping her pen against her notepad. Karoline remained composed. "Go ahead. Do you think the administration's policies are designed to suppress certain communities?" The data suggests Karoline held up a hand. "I've answered that question before. This administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans, regardless of background. If you'd like to discuss today's topic, I'm happy to continue." A few murmurs rippled through the room, but the reporter wasn't done. "You didn't actually answer the question," she pressed. "Can you directly address whether I did answer?" Karoline interrupted, her tone firm but controlled. She glanced at the other journalists, signaling that she was ready to move on. For a brief moment, it seemed like the tension might settle. "But then I just don't see why you're avoiding it," the reporter insisted. "It's a simple yes or no. Do these policies suppress marginalized groups?" The air in the room shifted. Other journalists exchanged glances, some intrigued, others uncomfortable. No one liked when a press conference turned into a showdown, but that was exactly what was happening. Karoline took a slow breath. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm staying on topic. If you have a question related to today's discussion, I'll gladly answer it. Otherwise, I'll be moving on." But the reporter leaned in even closer. "So that's a no comment?" The energy in the room tightened. The weight of the moment settled over everyone. It was clear this wasn't just about policy anymore. It was becoming a spectacle. A hush fell over the room. No one spoke, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, like a stretched rubber band about to snap. Karoline adjusted her stance, placing both hands on the podium. "I've answered your question. I'm moving on." She pointed to another journalist in the back, but before they could speak, the same voice interrupted. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" A flicker of irritation crossed Karoline's face, not much, just a slight tightening around the eyes, but enough for those paying attention to notice. She wasn't new to this. She knew reporters had a job to do, but there was a difference between pressing for accountability and turning an event into personal theater. And this was theater. Cameras panned between Karoline and the reporter, capturing every shift in body language, every subtle reaction that could be spun into a headline. Karoline exhaled through her nose. "I don't believe in wasting anyone's time. If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'd like to give others a chance." The reporter smirked. "Sure. New question. Why is this administration so afraid of transparency?" A few reporters gasped quietly. Others scribbled notes, sensing the moment escalating. Karoline's grip on the podium tightened for just a second before she let go, exhaling slightly. She smiled, but not the warm, diplomatic kind. This was different. A smile that said, "I see exactly what you're doing." "Transparency," she repeated. "That's exactly what this administration stands for. But what you're doing isn't about transparency, it's about theatrics." The words hung in the air. The reporter's smirk faltered. A journalist near the back cleared his throat, trying to steer the conference back on track. "Karoline, if I could, but again," the same voice interrupted. "So, you're dismissing valid concerns as theatrics? The American people deserve real answers." The room tensed again. A veteran journalist muttered under his breath, "This isn't journalism. This is performance art." Karoline saw what was happening. The longer this dragged on, the more likely it was to go viral. She had a choice: engage and fuel the fire or shut it down. She sighed, glancing towards security at the side of the room. She didn't have to say anything. The shift in her gaze was enough. The room tensed again. This was no longer just a heated exchange, it was about to escalate. The reporter, a woman in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and unwavering posture, didn't move. She was still leaning forward, pen resting against her notepad, a quiet smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. She wasn't here for answers. She was here to make a point. Karoline straightened. "I'll say this one more time. If you have a relevant question, I will answer it. But I'm not going to engage in bad faith arguments." The reporter chuckled softly. "Bad faith? I'm just doing my job. Isn't that what a free press is for?" Karoline didn't blink. A free press holds people accountable. What you're doing is creating a spectacle. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Some journalists exchanged glances, sensing the shift. The reporter tapped her pen against her notepad. "So, just to be clear, are you refusing to answer because you can't or because you don't want to?" Karoline inhaled sharply. "I am refusing to play a game. This press conference is not about you." The smirk on the reporter's face flickered. Then she leaned back in her seat, arms crossed. "Right, because expecting transparency is a game." Karoline adjusted the microphone slightly. "I think we're done here." The room fell silent. The reporter's eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" Karoline didn't flinch. "You've made it clear you're not interested in an actual discussion. If you'd like to stay and listen, you're welcome to. But I won't be answering any more of your questions." The reporter let out a dry laugh. "So much for freedom of the press, huh?" Karoline remained still. Freedom of the press doesn't mean hijacking a press conference. A uniformed officer took a slow step forward. The reporter hesitated. She could make them physically remove her, turn it into an even bigger moment, or walk out on her own terms. She chose the latter. "This is a disgrace," she muttered, just loud enough for the microphone's as she exited. The silence in the room was deafening. Then, from the back, "Karoline, do you think this was the right decision?" She straightened. "I think it was necessary." By the time she left the podium, her phone was already buzzing. It had begun. Karoline walked away, her face calm, but inside, she knew what was coming. The moment she had locked eyes with security, it had all been set in motion. She had seen it before, how moments like these played out. A reporter gets escorted out, the video gets clipped, the context gets lost, and a dramatic headline does the rest. It was almost predictable. As she stepped into her office, her aide was right behind her. "What about our base?" Karoline asked, pushing open the door. The aide quickly responded, "They're backing you. Conservative commentators say you handled it professionally. The usual voices are on your side." Karoline nodded, barely surprised. "And the White House?" "They're keeping their distance." Not condemning you, but not defending you either. Karoline leaned against her desk, arms crossed. That wasn't unexpected. She glanced at her phone, scrolling through the flood of notifications. She didn't have to ask about the reporter she already knew. She's leaning into it, isn't she? The aide sighed, nodding. She did a live interview already. Called it a chilling moment for press freedom. She's getting booked on every major network. Of course she was. Karoline exhaled, staring at the ceiling for a brief moment before straightening. She wanted this. And we just gave it to her. Her aide hesitated. So what's the move? Karoline didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked to the window, looking down at the street below. Reporters were already gathering, cameras ready, waiting for her next move. She had a choice. Stay quiet and let the moment pass, or get ahead of it before the narrative hardened against her. Her jaw tightened. The fight wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. Inside, her aides were glued to their screens, monitoring the growing storm. The reactions are split, one finally said. Some say it was justified that you removed an unprofessional disruptor. Others, she hesitated, are calling it an attack on democracy. Karoline let out a short laugh. An attack on democracy? For removing someone who refused to follow the rules? Her aide didn't respond. They both knew the truth didn't always matter, not in the fast-moving world of online outrage. Just then, another aide walked in, holding up his phone. She just posted her full statement. Karoline took a deep breath. Let's hear it. He read from the screen. Today, I was removed from a press conference for doing my job asking tough questions. This administration claims to value transparency, but when faced with real scrutiny, they silence the press. This should alarm every American who believes in accountability and free speech. Karoline scoffed. And let me guess, no mention of how she disrupted the entire event? Nope. Just playing the victim. It was all so predictable. The selective editing, the carefully crafted statements, the exaggerated claims of suppression. She had seen it all before. Now, she had to decide how to respond. Her first instinct was to fight back. Hold a press briefing. Lay out exactly what had happened. Make it clear that removing a disruptive journalist wasn't the same as silencing the press. But she knew how that would go. The moment she engaged, the cycle would keep spinning. Outside, the crowd of reporters was growing. A news van pulled up. More microphones. More cameras. What's our best move? Karoline finally asked. Her aide hesitated. We could release the full, unedited footage before her version gets too much traction. Let people see for themselves how many times she was warned before security stepped in. Another aide nodded. That way, it doesn't look like a defensive move. Just transparency. Karoline considered it. It was smart. Let the facts speak for themselves. But she also knew facts alone didn't win battles. Perception did. She glanced at her phone. The headlines were already being written. The cable news segments were probably in production. The debates, the outraged panel discussions, the op-eds dissecting her every move, all inevitable. She took a deep breath. Do it. Release the full footage. Her aides got to work immediately. Within the hour, the video was live. No flashy edits, no dramatic music, just a raw, unfiltered clip of the entire exchange. The caption was simple. Watch for yourself. The full exchange between Karoline Leavitt and the reporter at today's press conference. She leaned back in her chair, watching as the views skyrocketed. Thousands within minutes. Comments flooded in. Some furious. Some supportive. The battle had begun. Her phone buzzed with a message from a media ally. Smart move. This takes the wind out of their sails. But Karoline knew it wasn't that simple. The spin was already in motion. The reporter had gone on multiple networks telling her side of the story, painting herself as the victim. Karoline clicked on one of the interviews. There she was, sitting under dramatic lighting, her expression grave. "I was simply doing my job," she told the anchor. "I was asking tough but necessary questions, and instead of answering, they removed me. That should worry everyone." The anchor nodded solemnly. "Did you feel threatened?" Karoline rolled her eyes. "Threatened," the reporter sighed dramatically. "Not physically, but professionally? Absolutely. This is an attack on journalism itself." The screen cut to a panel discussion. Dangerous precedent. Disturbing for free speech. She was just doing her job. Karoline sighed, locking her phone. The facts were out there, but that didn't mean people would accept them. Just then, an aide peeked into her office. "You should see this." She followed them down the hall to a group gathered around a TV. A conservative network was airing the full clip she had released. She interrupted over and over, the host said, shaking his head. This wasn't journalism. This was grandstanding. A panelist nodded. She knew exactly what she was doing. Push until she gets removed, then play the victim. "Here's the reality," the host continued. Karoline Leavitt didn't shut down the press. She shut down an activist posing as a journalist. Karoline crossed her arms. It was clear now. One side defended her. The other painted her as the villain. Her aide turned to her. "This is going to be a long week." Karoline nodded. "Yeah, but at least the truth is out there." The days passed and the story refused to die. The headlines, the debates, the endless social media arguments. But something stood out. On one panel, a respected journalist finally spoke up. "We have to be honest," he said. "This wasn't about seeking the truth. This was about creating a viral moment." She asked a question, got an answer, didn't like it, and kept pushing. Not for clarity, but for conflict. And when she was removed, she played the victim. That's not journalism. That's activism. Karoline exhaled slowly. Finally, someone had said it. But she knew it wouldn't change much. The people who wanted to believe she was suppressing free speech never would, and the people who supported her had already moved on to the next fight. Her aide knocked. "You have an interview request from—" "No," Karoline said immediately. The aide blinked. "You don't even know who it's from." "I don't care," Karoline said, standing. "I'm not playing into this any further. The facts are out. Let them do what they want with them." The aide hesitated, then nodded. Understood. Karoline looked at her phone one last time. The outrage cycle would move on. It always did. But this wasn't just about her. It was about the way the media worked now, the way narratives were shaped, the way truth was becoming secondary to clicks and outrage. She looked back at her aide. "Release one last statement. What do you want it to say?" Karoline smiled. "Just 4 words. Watch the full video.